Guy Katsovitch, thank you for joining me. Startup Nation United. We're in November 3rd, so 28 days into the war after the terrible October 7th occurrences. You've been one of the most, I think, active players, contributors, spirits during this time. I think that the things you've experienced from springing into action, the social impact, the the tangible impact on the situation right when this war unfolded, all the way to actually serving in reserves and being within the efforts on the ground, and then operationally continuing to be a leading force within the ecosystem. I think that's it just speaks a testament to who you are as part of and what your role within the amazing Startup Nation ecosystem. So first of all, I want to share a quick effect, inspiration from my end, but I thank you for sharing this time with me. I know how busy you are. Tell me a little bit about who you are outside the context of this war and the context of this conflict.
So thank you, Michael, for the opportunity. I'm Guy Katsovitch, as you mentioned. I'm a founding partner at Fusion. For the sake of this interview, from an Israeli high tech perspective, Fusion is a pre-seed platform for Israeli startups. Think of us as the equivalent for what Y Combinator as an accelerator and a pre-seed platform is doing in Silicon Valley and throughout the world. This is what we aim to do and actually doing for the last almost 7 years in Israel. We invested in more than 100 companies, usually almost every time as the first check in. And besides giving them money, we also given them our, let's say, immersive platform of content, workshops, and introductions to clients and follow-on investors, with the purpose of helping Israeli founders get going wherever they are, whenever they are. So that's what we did over the last 7 years. 100 companies, an accumulated valuation of more than $1 billion. We have already a bunch of successful exits behind us, and every other month we do a bunch of investments locally here in Israel. So that's it. Yeah.
So besides investments, you're also very active energy within the ecosystem. Whether it's the engagement with early stage founders, you're effectively being the first check. You really are sort of a foundational layer into this ecosystem. So share with me just a little bit about how you're experiencing the ecosystem in Israel, the startup nation. From a pre-seed perspective, you're really working with them, with us. I have the pleasure of also being a part of Fusion myself. You're working with us from the literally day zero, and building us up. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience of this pre-seed, early stage experience within Israel.
Yes, so you mentioned our other activities within the local ecosystem. So yes, part of our strategy is to give content and workshop and tools and teach methodologies of how to build startups for every Israeli entrepreneur, not necessarily those that are part of our portfolio. So we have a very active entrepreneurial community. Thousands of people are members of our community. They are not necessarily portfolio founders. And we're doing a lot of events over the last 6-7 years. We did more than 400 events that are open to Israeli audience, whether they are founders or people that want to get going with their startups. And I'm also, like you, a content creator, and I have at least two podcasts that I'm running here locally in Israel. One of them is focused on tech investments and how to build a startup. Another one is more on growth mindset and self-growth. And as you mentioned, we are very much involved in the ecosystem at a broader scale, because this is what part of how we see our role within the ecosystem. Regarding this, let's call it the state of the pre-seed funding, I would be honest. I think considering everything that's going on, it's pretty early to determine what would be the effect of this war on the ecosystem. I think that at the immediate level, of course, and naturally, we saw a decrease in attention of investors, whether they are VCs or angels or other, early stage vehicles, because everybody was dealing with the war, whether they were on reserve duty, doing social, civil volunteering, or just trying to get their mental and emotional shit together. But I think that now, looking at it from a broader perspective, talking with dozens of colleagues, I think we can definitely say that 3 weeks after one of the most horrible attacks in the last decades, Israel is really getting stronger and people are getting back to business. So this is encouraging.
Wonderful. Going back to October 7th, we hit all of us in different capacities. 6:30 a.m. October 7th. How did this whole thing unfold for you personally?
So for me, as a citizen, first of all, I was asleep when the first rockets were shot at Tel Aviv. I woke up at my bed with my significant other, and we immediately went to take shelter in our building. And after a few hours, the events unfolded for us as well as for everyone else. We realized that there was, a big attack with a lot of atrocities that happened there in the south, and we realized that we have to do something. So no more than 24 hours after the first events, we called to a bunch of people, and I specifically gave a call to a guy named Nimrod Arnin, who is the main producer of the Nova Festival, the nature party that happened back in the south, and told them Nimrod, he was luckily alive. He was one of the main producers. His sister, by the way, got murdered in the same party that he organized. And I called him and I told him, Nimrod, his nickname is Nimi. I called and told him, Nimi, let's build a civil war room together. Meet me at so and so, and let's start working. So Nimrod and a bunch of his friends for the production of the Nova Festival and us gathered in an office of a tech company in Tel Aviv and started to work on building what would be called later on the ITech Civil War Room, which is a civil grassroots initiative of a lot of people from the Israeli tech industry in order to help, both army units to get supplies and stuff that are needed, but also in order to help, I would say, with the discovery of people that their tracks were lost in the south after those events. So we did both of those activities in parallel, raising donations in order to buy equipment and deliver those to the army, definitely on the first 2 weeks of the war, and then also in parallel working with a lot of technological and data related tools in order to help the production company of the Nova Festival find out the geolocations, the locations of people that were missing after the festival. And we were happily and luckily, if I can use those words in that context, we're successful in finding almost 40 people with this during the activity of this war room. So that's what we did. That was the first thing that we did actually.
That's unbelievable. Talk to me about this springing into action. So 24 hours. There's multiple aspects here. There's the immediate, spring into action, calling and making, organizing everything, and actually operationalizing it in matter of hours. But then there's also the involvement of people who are highly affected. I think that these two concepts really speak volumes to the nature of how we live and our way of life, both entrepreneurially but also as citizens. How why spring into action so quickly? What was going through your mind? What does this reflect for you on our ecosystem at large?
Yeah, if I understand you correctly, then I'll be honest, and I think that this is my way of coping with the situation. At first, when the event just happened on October 7th, like everyone else, I was shocked, I was surprised, I was sad, I was panicking, I was shaking, sitting in my sofa, just scrolling through Telegram, getting the news, seeing the videos of the atrocities that happen in the South, like everyone else. And after a few hours, I found myself, I looked at myself from above and said, "Wow, guy, you've been sitting here with your partner for the last few hours, just scrolling to the news. Let's try and do something useful." So that's where I called Nimi, and luckily he picked up. He was alive, and we started working.
Unbelievable. Okay, so place the situation for a second. If I were to walk into the high tech civil war room, if I go in there on the Tuesday, 3 days later, what am I experiencing? What am I seeing? What am I experiencing? What is the energy? Who is there?
So you're getting into an office of a growth stage tech company in Israel called Walnut, by the way. I don't know if you had the pleasure of interviewing Yoav Vilner, who hosted us for no cost there, of course. Nobody was in the office from Walnut because all the people were going to reserve duty to milium or just were dealing, volunteering in other places. And what you would see in there is a fancy office of Israeli startup with all the perks. And then the first thing that you would see when you open the doors, you would see dozens of boxes with a lot of equipment that will soon be sent to army units, whether they're in the south or in the north, and some also to other families of civilians that were evacuated of the south and the north. So both. And then if you would go deeper into the offices, you would see that the rooms fills with volunteers that are either working on the computers, making calls to army units to make sure what do they need, or to people of, to families of people that were involved with the Nova Festival to make sure that we can help them and give them assistance as they need it. And other rooms full of people that were calling donors in order to raise money. So we actually built this operation in less than 24 hours, and it was pretty amazing to see how many people that didn't know each other gathered in the same space in order to create an impact for the benefit of Israel and the Israeli society.
How did this continue to unfold for you personally over the next couple of weeks? You were called into reserve duty. Uh, how did you continue being a part? Well, how did this conflict continue on a personal level for you?
Yeah, so for me, after and in parallel of building the civil war room, I was in touch with my people in the army, asked them to go on reserve duty. I did that and still am doing that in some capacity as we speak right now, even though I'm not wearing uniform. I've been serving in the army for 6 years, and since then I've been doing reserve duty like every other Israeli every once and then. And then after we felt that the civil war room has been stabilized, we nominated a leadership to take a lead of this initiative, and I started to also get to put more focus on Fusion Portfolio Company, because if you remember and you were with us at the beginning of the interview, I'm also running an investment platform with more than 100 active portfolio companies, so we need to be there for our funders as well. So we immediately started to do what we know how to do best, which is to create a platform for them, whether we are talking about workshops and content or connection or just a safe space for them to share in relation to the situation. So we already gathered them more than a couple of times with psychologist and therapist and organizational coach that can help our founders deal with this complex insane situation and learn and discuss how to run the company properly when you're in wartime, actual wartime CEO. um, and in parallel, we try to reach out to almost everyone and make sure that they haven't been affected so much of the situation, whether they're going to reserve duty or not. Do they need our help and backup? Can we help with connections or supplies or stuff like that? And make sure that everyone are okay. So yeah, we did, and we are still doing that.
So, having an observation to more than 100 early stage startups in the Israeli ecosystem, Israeli founders, this is a very, these are very delicate stages, right? These companies that we're running, they're not yet, they're not yet at a point where it's necessarily a well-oiled machine. There's a lot of moving pieces, and we're adding the complexity of wartime emergency. And now, as entrepreneurs, we have to even be even more entrepreneurial and have more resilience. What has been your observation over these 3 weeks, as to the 100 plus community members under Fusion that you see are dealing with this? So for either from how the founders have been dealing with this, how the companies have been dealing with this, what has been your experience of the early stage ecosystem in response?
So all in all, I don't want to sound too cliche, but when you are facing very big unusual challenges, then you can see some people, their entrepreneurial spirits actually thrive. So it's really interesting to see, and maybe it sounds like a cliche about the Israeli founder, Israeli typical entrepreneur that can break through walls, quote unquote. But you really see that despite all the hardship, some of the team members are getting called to reserve duty. Some people that they know, maybe they lost their life and got murdered on the day of October 7th. They're still being very resilient on an average level, and keep doing the work in order to get their company going. Of course, there are, let's call that, objective variables that affect the ability of a company to operate. If you run an A round or a B round, let's say startup, and half of your team is being now called to reserve duty, and the others have to stay home and work from home because the educational system is partially working, so you need to stay with your kids at home, then of course it will have an effect on the operation on your startup on the operational level. But I think all alone, when you talk with the people, hear from the spirit, and look at it from the bird eye point of view, I think that people are getting the most out of the situation. And there are startups that have been objectively affected by it because the team was called to reserve duty and have to stay at home. But there are also a lot of companies that are keep doing business as usual and just keep bringing on clients and raising on money, such as yourself, by the way, Michael, which is amazing.
I think one of the key elements that I'm constantly being inspired by, and I hope that investors and others, both from Israel and abroad, are observant to, is really a testament to the resilience of entrepreneurs that are coming out of Israel. And I think that these are times, when you think about due diligence, when you think about what types of founders people want to back. I mean, I can't imagine more strenuous, rigorous situations than a wartime, to be able to look at founding teams and early employees and see, okay, is this a company that we believe can manage through hardships and through the difficulties of running a company? And I think that and I'm very happy to see how so much of the community is so resilient, and part of that is working together into this ecosystem. And so when I'm thinking about the impact that we're going to have on the investment side on our ecosystem moving forward, also post war, I'm very optimistic that the world will see what the way that our ecosystem has been handling the situation, how early stage startups have been handling it, and it will just give more optimism and more energy into investments in our ecosystem. Is that also how you've been seeing it?
Yes, I would also talk about it from a different prism, which is it. I don't want to say it doesn't matter what the world is thinking, because of course it does. But I think that we as Israelis now understand the importance of it, our ability to thrive in times of difficulties. And also, when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, Israel is really a miracle when you think about it. A company with the stats and numbers that we have, in terms of GDP, startups per capita, the amount of money that is being investment in the tech ecosystem, the amount of unicorns and startup and companies that has been IPO'd in Wall Street that are coming out of Israel, which is just a 10 million people state. And when you look at it from a historical point of view, you have a war or a military operation here every 2 to 3 years. It's just crazy. And despite all of that, the economy is thriving, cost of living is getting up, the quality of living is getting up, and all the civil systems, including the economy and the tech industry itself in it, are growing consecutively over the last few decades. So it's really, really interesting to see.
So finally, transitioning just to fusion. It's you're not only supporting the ecosystem and not only um, serving the ecosystem and with your time and your energy with the Civil War Room and reserves. You've also continued being operational as an early stage fund. You've mentioned that you've continued making investments even over this last month, which I think is unbelievable. How do you maintain? What is Fusion doing today with in the context of what's happening? How have you maintained operationalizing throughout this war?
Yes, so our claim to fame is to be the first check into companies and to invest before VCs and angels and be like your friends and family, let's say. So we take bets in companies where other people can't, and we take bets in times when other people can't. So I think that if this is our claim to fame, this is our, let's call that, our calling even, to invest and to double down on Israel during these tough times. So over the last months, we invested in 12 new companies, one, two. Nine of them were new investments. Three of them were follow-up investments in companies that we already put the first check in through our accelerator. And we are now looking at, let's say, 2 to 3 more concrete deals, meaning that we started seeing, we backed into seeing companies and deal flow once again. To be honest, of the first week or so after October 7th, we weren't that active, but we were gradually back into activities, and now we're almost 100% on.
Incredible. And all of this in in 28 days. Everything we just spoke about, everything in 28 days. And most of it happened within the first week of the war. So I think that's just an important context for us to keep in mind the time frame that we're talking about, which I think is unbelievable. Guy, thank you so much for everything. Thank
Thank
you
you
first
very
of all
much.
as a founder that you're supporting. Thank you as an Israeli citizen that you're supporting with all the amazing work. And thank you for the inspiration over these 20 or so minutes. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for your time. I appreciate it as well. And stay safe. Good luck.